Exposing deep state, banana republic corruption. Martin North, John Adams, Industry People. Hello, John.
Hi, mate.
That's a nice little title.
We are back in the studio, Martin. We have some extraordinary news that has happened in the last 24 hours. Now, some people may say, well, it's been almost 2 weeks since we've done our last show, so what has happened? And it is the usual excuse. When we don't do a show, I'm busy cooking on something. So so there are some individuals and organisations who want a bit of assistance in engagement with the Asic inquiry. So we've been working away on some very important stuff along those lines. But in the course of the last week, there has been some very interesting things that we can now reveal to the audience, Martin. And that is that there was a set of rumours last week that came across my desk that on the 27th of October, when the Senate voted to establish the inquiry into Asic, that Asic itself was attempting to influence members of parliament and the senators not to vote for the inquiry. So that was the rumour. And when I heard the rumour, Martin, I was initially stunned, but also quite surprised, because obviously through my own engagements over the last few months, I was quick to realise that Asic has no friends in the Senate. And doesn't have much political capital in the House of Representatives. So if they were to pick up the phone and say, ignore this Adams person, ignore, in the interest of the people, ignore these reports that Adams has written, there's no need for an inquiry. I look, when these rumours were put to me last week, I said, well, who would they call, and what utility would that yield? And it was put to me that Asic had the perception they had some friends, but obviously when they picked up the phone, according to the rumour, if they had picked up the phone, they soon realised that they didn't have friends, and obviously the vote went according to 43 to 20 to establish an inquiry, and obviously we have the second inquiry at a different committee, and that committee has yet to call for public submission. So whatever attempt that Asic attempted to do to interfere in the proper functioning of Parliament, if that was to be true, it didn't work.
And just to say that vote against, of course, that was by Labour, who was supporting their own alternative version of an inquiry. So it wasn't like they're against an inquiry, they just didn't want that particular flavour of the inquiry.
Exactly. So pretty much across the Senate, it is basically a uniform consensus. They want an inquiry into Asic. So the question is, did Asic? And we were just talking about this before the camera started rolling, Martin, about the separation of power. So for those that don't understand our basic constitutional system, we have the legislature, which basically writes the laws. We have the executive that implements the laws. And then we have the judiciary that judges, that makes judgments as to whether those laws have been contravened or not. So there are some important principles dating back to the 18th century about the importance of separating what the legislature does. And obviously the main role of Parliament is not just writing the laws of the country, it's also overseeing the executive. So when we talk about parliamentary accountability, this is all about have the ministers and have the agencies under the Crown, have they actually used their legal powers in accordance with what Parliament have what they have bestowed upon them, but also have they used public money in a proper way. So this oversight function of Parliament is critical to a functioning democracy, a constitutional democracy. And so you cannot have a situation, Martin, where effectively the police, whether it's the state police here in New South Wales or the financial police as in Asic, stopping Parliament or trying to manipulate Parliament if the Parliament wants to obviously ensure that the police are actually doing a proper job.
Yeah, and it's worth underscoring, isn't it, that the role of oversight from Parliament is on Asic, even the RBA, APRA, those other entities. The question, of course, is how effective is that oversight?
Yes.
And we would probably argue that it's not been very effective in recent times, and in fact those various bodies tend to sort of just waffle their way through. But when actually the Parliament says, no, we want to really go serious on this, well, that's a really important message to that regulator.
Look, that I would agree with. But the other thing, Martin, is that so in a previous career, I was a public servant. I've worked in various Commonwealth government departments, also New South Wales government departments. As a public servant, I understand that I work for a minister. And that minister is ultimately accountable to Parliament. And so the actions that I do in the workplace as a public servant is that I'm ultimately accountable to the Parliament. And if I've done something wrong, well, then Parliament can ultimately hold me as a public servant, but also my minister. So that's obviously the proper understanding of the bureaucrat. And obviously, having joined the public service in Canberra in 2007, I had that proper understanding in terms of the very beginning. But it is completely improper for public officials to stop Parliament's activities or interfere in Parliament's activities if Parliament is doing legitimate oversight over the actions and the performance of a government entity.
Well, I have to say, John, listening to the recent Senate go around with RBA, I rather felt that the RBA was there. I suppose we have to answer their questions rather than actually being, fully engaged. So there is also, I think, an attitudinal question behind this as well.
Yeah, indeed. So now the thing is that before we get into the shocking news that came out only in the last 24 hours about this question, did ASIC attempt to interfere with Parliament? There is a tangential link to some recent scandals in the crypto space in terms of cryptocurrency platform FTX. So one of the things that, Martin, we said in a previous show, and people say, well, why are we stopping talking about interest rates and property prices, and all that sort of stuff is that if we can do analysis on markets, we can talk about prices going up and down and macroeconomic factors and all those sort of things. But if you don't have a properly functioning market, if there is systemic fraud in the market, and you don't have financial police, ensuring that the players are using investors' money properly and that the laws are being adhered to, well then what's the point of doing market analysis and valuations and thinking that I'm worth $1 million, but if the $1 million is a fantasy because of fraud, then obviously you have nothing behind you. And so we're going to get into this FTX issue in this show as well, because ultimately this whole series of shows is ensuring that that the financial police do their jobs, and that if people do make claims that I am of this net worth, that wealth, those assets are legitimate, and that investors' money is being looked after by custodians in the right way.
Well, it is very important because the FTX thing is getting more and more concerning, not least because, of course, its tentacles are everywhere. But interestingly, in the US, the regulators in the US a few months ago were asking questions even then. So the regulators over there knew that there was something awry way back.
Indeed. Now, what happened yesterday, Martin, was that last week Senator Bragg, the chairman of the inquiry, who was on our last show, he put specific questions on notice to ASIC, and those responses were received by the committee, and the committee secretariat published them on their website. So what we're about to reveal is not confidential, it is on the public record. So let's put so there was two questions, Martin. Let's put slide one on the screen. And so this is the question that Senator Bragg asked ASIC on notice. Question: did ASIC undertake any engagement with members of federal parliament in relation to this inquiry before it was considered by the Senate? The answer: yes. ASIC engages with members of parliament on a regular basis on a range of matters. So that is shocking, Martin, is that ASIC has confirmed that, and again, it's very specific about this inquiry. Did you talk to the parliament about this inquiry before the vote? The answer was yes. Now, there's only one context, Martin, where that would be appropriate, is that if they spoke to the minister. So ultimately, the chairman in terms of ASIC has a relationship within the confines of the executive branch of the government to the minister. So if the chairman of ASIC spoke to the treasurer, Jim Chalmers, or the assistant treasurer, Stephen Jones, in relation to this inquiry and the government's feelings about the inquiry, etc., that would be, in my view, okay. But if they spoke to anyone other than the minister, and this was an attempt to influence the vote, that would be completely improper. So we know now, by ASIC's own words, there was a conversation or a series of conversations and communications. The question is with who and what was said. So let's get to question 2, Martin, and this is question 2, what Senator Bragg asked is, if so, what activity occurred? Please supply any emails, text messages, or messages on any other platform between ASIC Commissioner and staff and members of Federal Parliament and their staff. So this is ASIC's response. While ASIC will be fully open and cooperative with the committee, it is not appropriate for ASIC to disclose its regular communications with parliamentarians and their staff. Now, that is a completely outrageous response from ASIC because, again, ASIC says we have regular communications. This series of questions was not about regular communications. This was about, did you talk about the inquiry before the vote and what did you say? And they refused to be completely transparent and open with the Parliament. And this is so when we talk about the deep state, I mean the deep state in the US or the deep state in this country, who is the deep state? It's the senior bureaucrats who are there on lifetime appointments who basically really run the show. I mean, politicians, having been a bureaucrat, I know the attitude in Canberra. Politicians come and go, but these bureaucrats stay in these roles, particularly senior levels, for 10, 20, 30 years, and they're the ones that really run the country. So when politicians come along that the bureaucrats don't respect, and the politicians say, well, I don't think you're doing a good job, I'm actually going to hold you to account. The deep state in this country attempts to circumvent the role of Parliament, circumvent that accountability, and obviously if they've done something wrong or if they haven't done a good job, they will basically want to avoid that scrutiny so they can continue in their senior roles on $500,000 plus and obviously continue the status quo. And so we know now that the deep state at ASIC attempted to engage in tactics which we would see in a banana republic, where you see the cops basically saying to the politicians, don't you dare look at our activity. We're trying to, we run the show, the police run the show, and that, Parliament has no role in actually overseeing or critiquing in terms of what the police does. But that is exactly what has happened here. Now, given how serious, Martin, this is and how outrageous it is, this morning I have written formally to the committee, and you've seen a copy of my letter. So I've asked the committee, in order to preserve the integrity of the inquiry and of Parliament, and to ensure that Parliament is independent and can't be influenced by deep state bureaucrats, I've asked for the committee to either hold a special public hearing demanding these ASIC officials to come to Parliament and answer the question, what did you say and who did you say to about the inquiry before 12 p.m. 27 October 2022, or to move to because the Senate itself as a chamber has the power to order the production of documents, so the Senate as a whole can move an order, and that order has legal powers where ASIC is forced to hand over records to the Parliament, so the Parliament is able to determine what was said to who. So now I've asked for this. We'll see what the committee does, but even before we get into ASIC's performance about investigations and prosecutions, and they're dealing with the general public, we have this immediate issue of Parliament, so in terms of ASIC, the financial police trying to stitch up a deal with the politicians and Parliament in order for them to avoid any form of scrutiny and accountability. I mean, if we want trust in the financial police, this issue has to be dealt with immediately before we can really proceed to any other matters.
Well, it is critical, isn't it? And as you say, from a procedural perspective, it needs to be dealt with before we look more broadly at the issues of matter, which of course the inquiry is going into. So it'll be interesting to see how the committee responds.
Absolutely. Now the thing is, if we just turn our attention in terms of this situation in terms of FTX, so it is a very big deal, because even if we put slide 3 on the screen, Martin, is only in the last couple of weeks did even the Australian newspapers say that up to 30,000 Australians have lost access to their crypto assets because they've had some type of either direct exposure to FTX or one of their other exchanges that they may have an influence over. And so this particular scandal has obviously huge implications for global investors.
Yep.
I mean, what was the market cap? 32 billion or 64 billion or something along those lines?
It's a big number. It's almost zero now.
Like over the last few weeks, Martin, there's been a lot of commentary about FTX on YouTube and Sam Bankman-Fried, and who this person was and what they were up to. So it's clear to me. And again, I'm not a crypto person, so I wasn't looking at FTX closely. But for those that were looking at it closely, and there was even a video I saw that was produced about 4 or 5 months ago about Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX, that this was systemic fraud from the very beginning. He looked like a very dubious character, and it was obviously, as we know now, money laundering. Thing is misappropriation of capital. Corrupt bribery of public officials through political donations, and all sorts of other nefarious things, including transferring $10 billion to a sister company called Alameda Research, and $2 billion of that $10 billion has gone completely invisible. So when you have someone who is closely linked to not a close link. I mean, Sam Bankman-Fried has been on the stage with Bill Clinton in terms of Tony Blair, has been photographed with US Congresswoman Maxine Waters, etc. And obviously, in the last few months, actually had a 45-minute phone call with the head of the SEC, Gary Gensler. So when you have all of these relationships, the question is, how is it that the SEC did not pick this up early and actually stop this fraud early, so that investors, not only in America but across the world, didn't have to suffer the financial consequences that people are going through at the moment?
Well, this is an interesting question, John, because there's a couple of observations. Firstly, of course, there's a question about where regulation for crypto is, because, of course, it's moving quite quickly. And if, in Australia, Asic has no real responsibility for crypto-related regulation. So the same in the US, the regulatory framework is not there. So I mentioned earlier on, the SEC was looking at FTX, but specifically from a sort of a banking lens in terms of how money was flowing around. The other is that the latest reports are that it could be up to 1 million people and entities that actually have or had assets in FTX. So it's a large number. And that includes a bunch of hedge funds, a bunch of banks, and other financial entities. So this is not just something which is sort of out there in crypto land. It's intruding into mainstream finance. And my own view is we haven't yet seen the full fallout. So it's not just the fall in the price of Bitcoin and the capitalization of crypto markets, which is now bound down to about 840 billion. It used to be 3 trillion, you may remember.
Yes.
The real issue is this fallout into the real financial system, where hedge funds and other banks have actually made big bets to try and make money.
Yes, I mean, it's so interesting you use that phrase, Martin, big bets, and now those big bets have gone sour.
Yep.
And had the Americans had proper financial governance and a proper financial police force at the SEC, those big bets probably would not have been made had they been able to crack down on Sam Bankman-Fried and in terms of FTX much earlier. So here's the thing. If people are interested in economics, if they're interested in public policy, if they're interested in terms of risk management investments, but also how to make money, it's not just about looking at the markets and looking at the price and looking at demand and supply and all the things that we typically talk about. It's also ensuring that if there are systemic fraudsters in the market, both historical or current, that those fraudsters are identified early and are picked up and thrown out of the system, so that the system maintains in terms of its market integrity. So that's why this whole genre is important. That's why the inquiry is important. That's why the lack of investigations by Asic is such a concern. And so we now have crypto investors across the world, bleeding money like crazy because the financial cops in America didn't do a proper surveillance job. And it could well be, Martin, and we'll have to see whether the reason why the SEC didn't do the job was because they were, politically in bed with the founder in terms of FTX, and not only Gary Gensler, but obviously other people, maybe in the Biden administration, maybe in the U.S. Congress, etc. So, and obviously, Sam Bankman-Fried gave $40 million to the Democrats. So, that sort of level of donations, which is, I think I saw one video second to only Soros. I mean, he had tremendous political clout, and once you're bribing people to that, and again, when I use the word bribe, these are legal donations, but once you're basically giving that level of financial support, people tend to look the other way.
And it's just worth reflecting that Rishi Sunak, who's now the Prime Minister in the UK, was advocating very strongly for an enlargement of the crypto sector as effectively a growth engine for the UK economy. Right? So that's one of the things I think so interesting here, that this is actually very much connected with a broader political agenda. In the low growth environment, people are grabbing at straws to try and find a growth engine. And guess what? Some of those senior politicians were seeing crypto as a potential life raft to be able to create more growth.
Indeed. So Martin, as we bring the show to a close, there is a deep state in this country. There's a deep state in other jurisdictions as well. There are nefarious, improper activity happening in this country. Obviously, in the last couple of years, people have been very concerned in the COVID space as to what that may or may not have been. But we have now on the record an admission from Asic that they improperly communicated with Parliament prior to Parliament voting into an investigation into the police force. And so we now have to ensure that the committee and the inquiry puts maximum pressure on Asic to fully disclose what was said to who, and that if there was anything egregious, people need to resign.
Absolutely. This is absolutely in the interest of the people.
100%.
Thanks, John. We'll see you next time. Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of the people. We'll see you next time.